Being the big, tough men and women that we all are down at TripleJump Towers, we love nothing more after a long day of chopping wood and drinking Boddingtons, tough, manly activities, than to settle down with a big glass of Lagavulin and stick on the most terrifying of spooky flicks. Back in reality land, I'm in bed by 9 PM with a nice cup of hot cocoa and still haven't recovered from watching The Nightmare Before Christmas. It's an 8-foot skeleton who kidnaps Santa. Why does everyone keep saying I'm overreacting? You're overreacting! Our sensitive dispositions aside, we hear that some people enjoy scary movies and even go so far as to watch them on purpose and aren't tricked into it, somehow. For them, I'd imagine there's little more disappointing than seeing one of their favourite films saddled with a crappy video game tie-in. For this list, we've trawled the depths of gaming and movie history to find the very best spoopy films that have inspired the most horrible video games. They range from disappointing when compared to their cinematic counterparts to absolutely abhorrent in every conceivable way. What fun! I'm Ben from TripleJump, and here are the 10 worst games based on good horror movies. Number 10. Evil Dead Regeneration. Here at Team TripleJump, we're big fans of sexy video game men. Check out our many videos on the subject. And if 2021's Evil Dead the game ends up being anything to write home about, we may see a bit of Ash Williams on our next hunky boy list. Sadly, even that chainsaw-handed boomstick-wielding slice of man-meat couldn't save 2005's Evil Dead Regeneration from utter mediocrity. Since its release in 1981, The Evil Dead has become a cult classic and is frequently cited as one of the greatest horror movies of all time. This independent film, produced on a shoestring budget, not only launched a franchise, but also the careers of director Sam Raimi and star Bruce Campbell. Then there's The Evil Dead Regeneration. Don't get us wrong, it's not the most horrible game on this list by an absolute country mile, with the PC version achieving a rather nice score of 69 on Metacritic, but what it fails to do is be even remotely memorable, with reviewers criticizing its lack of longevity and replayability, tedious escort missions, and failure to bring anything new to the table. The game isn't awful, but boy, is it disappointing. Number 9. Jaws Unleashed. Chief Brody may be an advocate for bigger boats, however, when it comes to Jaws Unleashed, the only boats I care for are fast ones to get me the heck away from this utterly pants game. Arguments over whether or not Jaws is a horror film aside, for the record, it 100% is. Look me in the eye and tell me you wouldn't cack yourself if you saw a giant shark chowing down on beachgoers. It is undeniably a masterpiece of cinema. The issue with producing such a wonderful piece of art is that everything that comes after it will be so meh. Just take a look at the film sequels and you'll understand that there really is nothing quite like the original. This is where the developers of 2006's Jaws Unleashed probably should have taken note, because the game is honestly an embarrassment to its franchise. Despite achieving a middle-of-the-road score of 51 on Metacritic, critics panned its largely forgettable missions, rubbish graphics, and frequent glitches, with one reviewer claiming that having your actual torso bitten off by an actual great white might actually be preferable to this. Ouch. Number 8. Blair Witch. Although the game is more closely linked to the 2016 film of the same name, should anyone utter the words Blair and Witch, specifically in that order, our minds go directly to the original and far superior Blair Witch Project from all the way back in 1997. Another title that boasts a nice score of 69 on Metacritic. In and of itself, Blair Witch is a fair horror game and was even nominated for Xbox Game of the Year at the 2019 Joystick Awards. The main problem is that it stands forever in the shadow of the critical darling that inspired it, and so arguably would have been better off ditching the Blair Witch Association altogether. Cursed with an uninspired story and twists that most players saw coming a mile off, this was a disappointment that left us crying snottily in a dark corner, but not for any of the reasons we would have liked. Number 7. A Nightmare on Elm Street. It's time for a trip into the past as we not so fondly look back at A Nightmare on Elm Street for the NES, a game described by one critic as unusually good for a film-based game, which is a backhanded compliment if I've ever heard one. At least it had better be backhanded, as no other kind of compliment applies here. Although the sequels got progressively campier and dafter as the years went on, the original A Nightmare on Elm Street was pretty scary stuff, and remains so to this day, if you forget that ridiculous mum doll that gets pulled through the window at the end. Unfortunately, the same can't be said of the 1989 video game, which received mixed reviews at the time, and in retrospect has been accused of being a low-rent Castlevania. The main criticism levelled at A Nightmare on Elm Street is the unfair difficulty level, unavoidable hazards, and uninspired boss fights. Also, it missed a trick by barely drawing anything from the movies that inspired it. If only this game had even a fraction of Freddy's personality, it might have been worth playing. Might. Number 6. Halloween. When your game doesn't even have a proper label on it, you know you're in for a rough time. One of the films that launched the slasher genre into the mainstream, John Carpenter's 1978 spookfest Halloween still holds up to this day. Unfortunately, the 1983 Atari 2600 game of the same name is unable to make such a boast. By all accounts, of which we were able to find approximately 3, the game itself is okay for what it is, with players taking the role of a teenage babysitter whose goal it is to save as many kids from a knife-wielding maniac as possible. The main issue is its lack of similarity to its namesake, serving as little more than a mediocre gaming experience attempting to ride the coattails of a classic movie. Although slightly better received than the publisher's previous title, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween wasn't enough to save developer Wizard Video from bankruptcy. I suppose there's a happy ending after all. Number 5. Predator Concrete Jungle. I'm going to begin this entry by saying this. Predator is a great movie. Do not at me! Is it great for the same reasons as Citizen Kane and Ben-Hur? No. Obviously not, but like everything that our man Arnold S. puts his name to, it's a great bit of campy, endlessly quotable fun. Get to the chopper? I am talented. Sadly, the same cannot be said of 2005's Predator Concrete Jungle, which crosses the so bad it's good line straight into rubbish game land. The real shame is the unforgivable waste of a premise, because the idea of playing as the Predator is nothing short of genius. Earning only 47% on Metacritic, this bland offering was criticised by more or less everyone who played it for its rubbish controls, awful character models, and a story that you'll probably only be able to fully grasp if you've read the comics. Now, we're all for an extended universe, but if you can't tell a competent story within the confines of the medium, well, then I can't say, I'll be back. What's that? Wrong movie? They won't notice. Number 4. Saw 2 Flesh and Blood. By 2004, the horror movie landscape had become a bit bland, with little but slasher sequels and their squishy, irritating teenage victims to excite fans of the genre. Then, along came Saw, an original IP produced on a budget of around $1 million to shake things up. As is the nature with all successful things, there was a video game tie-in, and it was okay. Not great, but fine. Sadly, Saw the video game sold quite well, and we ended up cursed with Saw 2 Flesh and Blood. Receiving an abysmal score of 45 on Metacritic, it was universally panned for everything from its lack of scary atmosphere to poor combat mechanics to quick-time events that do nothing but take the player out of the moment. A badly acted and repetitive experience, Flesh and Blood took the not terrible premise of its predecessor and lobbed it into a pit of filthy hypodermic needles. Jigsaw may have wanted to play a game, but I doubt this is what he had in mind. Number 3. Land of the Dead, Road to Fiddler's Green. The titles of the previous entries on our list have one thing in common. They're vaguely scary. Even if it weren't an especially poo game, Land of the Dead, Road to Fiddler's Green would have landed itself a spot on this list for that title alone, which, rather than invoking feelings of dread, make us think of musicals and quaint British villages. Admittedly not the best of George A. Romero's Living Dead series of films, Land of the Dead is a highly enjoyable zombie romp for fans of the genre. Land of the Dead, Road to Fiddler's Green, on the other hand, is nothing but a poorly executed and shameless attempt at cashing in on a beloved franchise. Released in 2005 for the PC and Xbox, dodged a bullet there, Sony fans, the game was rightly derided for its glitchy gameplay and lack of a single original idea. Boasting a devastating score of just 32 on Metacritic, this absolute shambles of a game was even bestowed with GameSpot's Worst Game of the Year award, in the year that gave us that god-awful Charlie and the Chocolate Factory tie-in. That really is an achievement in itself. Well done. Number 2. Friday the 13th. A quick Google of Friday the 13th game will return hundreds of results for the 2017 title, so it's important that we begin this entry by making something very clear. We are not trying to incite controversy by dumping on that game, which is pretty great. We're dumping where dumps should be dumped on the absolute travesty that is Friday the 13th for the NES. I mean, just look at the box art. It looks like a Scotch VHS tape. The only thing frightening about that is how hideously 80s the whole thing is. It's giving me Thatcher flashbacks. Oh, God! Considered one of the finest slashers of all time, the film Friday the 13th is beloved by horror fans the world over. The NES game, on the other hand, is considered to be not only one of the worst horror titles ever made, but generally one of the worst games of all time. It's a strange experience with its nauseating colour colour palette, the migraine-inducing music, and the difficulty of gameplay. And not in a cool Dark Souls kind of way, but in more of a I wish Jason would come and murder me in real life kind of way. Literally anything to make it stop. Number 1. Aliens Colonial Marines. If at the beginning of this video you put money on us placing Alien Colonial Marines in the top spot, then congratulations, you're now a teensy bit richer. This may be a predictable number 1, but there isn't another game as worthy of the TripleJump award for crappiest horror movie game in a sea of crappy horror movie games. Aliens is nothing short of a horror masterpiece. It's wonderfully acted, with Sigourney Weaver even receiving an Academy Award nomination, which for a sci-fi film at the time was unheard of. The special effects and sound design are transcendent, and most importantly, it's actually scary. The scariest thing about the dumpster fire, that is Aliens Colonial Marines, is how terrible it is. Upon release, it was criticised for its uninspired gameplay, its unoriginal approach to the FPS genre, poor graphics, and overall shoddy, buggy quality. Modders have spent hundreds if not thousands of hours resolving the technical issues with Aliens Colonial Marines, only for it to still not be a very good game. That alone is reason enough to give it first prize in this parade of cruddy titles. It may have a slightly higher score on Metacritic than others on this list, but we simply cannot ignore the night and day contrast between Colonial Marines and its source material, and we feel no remorse for declaring it the worst horror movie tie-in ever. Yeah, that's right.